Hello, welcome to today's webinar on cost estimating for the project manager. This webinar is the second of a series hosted by the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management. I'm Patricia Bush, Program Manager for Bridges of Design at AASHTO and today's host. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes to help you enjoy today's session. All attendees are automatically muted for the entire webinar. If you have questions at any point during the presentations, you can submit them by using the Q&A button on your Zoom webinar control panel. We will answer them throughout the course of the discussion. This session is being recorded, and the link will be made available on the Technical Committee on Project Management webpage. You can easily navigate to it by going to design.transportation.org and selecting Project Management from the menu on the left. An email with a PDH certificate will be sent to all attendees later today. If you can't find it, be sure to check your spam or junk folders. Download the certificate and keep it for your records. Now I will turn things over to Chris Roy, Assistant Engineering Services Division Director at the Minnesota DOT.
Thank you, Tricia, and welcome everyone. My name is Chris Roy. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and I'm one of the Assistant Division Directors. Also take a very special interest in project management. So as such, I'm a member of the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management. And as a group, we've decided to host a series of webinars on project management. And each one of the webinars is on a different topic of project management. Today's webinar is on cost estimating, specifically for the project manager. Today, what we wanted to do is draw together a couple of our technical experts from across the state on cost estimating and develop a panel. And in this panel, what we're going to be doing is looking for questions from the audience, and we'll be asking our panel members those questions about cost estimating as it relates to their state and answering the question. So with that, I'm going to give you a little introduction to each one of our panel members before we get started here. First, we have Nicole Coronado. Nicole is from the Texas DOT. She has over 14 years of project and portfolio management experience. She started her career as a bridge structures, designing them and ultimately managing an $11 billion portfolio on transportation projects. Nicole has a unique blend of project and portfolio management skills, including project planning and programming, with an emphasis on risk and cost management that can impact planning, programming, and delivery of transportation projects for the Texas DOT. She currently leads the first Texas Department of Transportation construction cost estimating community of practice. Nicole also serves as vice chair for Transportation Estimators Association and a member of the NCHRP 20-68 Domestic Scan Successful Approaches to Setting Project Development Budgets. Nicole received a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Texas in Austin. So welcome, Nicole. Next, I'll turn to Mark Anthony from the South Carolina DOT. Mark has 24 years of experience with the South Carolina DOT, 3 years in managing construction and inspection activities, over 10 years in traffic engineering, project manager, road designer for intersection improvement projects, performed design review of plans, and project manager for signing and marking projects. He also has 11 years of experience in the letting preparation engineer, where he oversees the engineer's estimates, proposals for letting, oversees standard drawing development, and oversees the state encroachment permit policies and processes. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Last but not least is Todd Pelletier. He is from the Maine Department of Transportation, where he serves as the Assistant Bureau Director for Project Development. Todd is an Assistant Director for the Bureau of Project Development at Maine DOT, a 1992 graduate of the University of Maine with a degree in civil engineering. Todd has worked his professional career with Maine DOT. Over that time, he has held positions including the Senior Highway Designer, Project Manager, Contract Procurement Office Director, Assistant Highway Program Manager, and Property Office Director. Todd previously served as Maine's DOT representative to AASHTO's Subcommittee on Right-of-Way Utilities and Outdoor Advertising Control, Subcommittee on Design, and the Technical Committee on Pre-Construction Engineering. So welcome, Todd.
Thank you.
With that, I'd like to ask our panel the first question as we're getting other questions from the audience. Hoping that each one of you would be able to give us a little bit of a briefly describe the cost estimating process from scoping through final design in your particular state. Nicole, would you mind going first?
Okay, sure. Well, thank you. So for developing cost estimates in our process is, we start off with project, it's scoped, you have some idea, and ideally if it starts in the schematic stage, you're going to be developing it. And what we want to start with is identifying risk. You want to go through, we recommend looking at that and evaluating risk to develop some risk-based contingency. It can be parametric from what you know from historical information and data. But if there is quantifiable items at that time, we do recommend those quantifiable items be developed, as well as allowances. Anything that's going to be a part of the project of 100%. We really want to identify that early on in that cost. And so as you work through each of your stages from schematic and moving into detailed design and into PS&E, the estimate is updated and it's updated at any significant area. And the identified areas of development of items are updated, allowances are evaluated and looked over, as well as the risk-based contingency. And so in our process, as you move through that, those allowances become part of the identified items, and in the risk-based contingency, as those risk responses get taken care of, as the risk is responded to, it does decrease the time. And so and that's overall what we do as we for our cost estimating and that process, and kind of an overview. But we, really, want to emphasize about allowances. There's been, some times where sometimes it gets overlooked, and want to take into that cost before it, knowing it's there, and we don't want to, later on be like, oh, well, we knew we needed ITS, but we turned around but did not account for that cost and that allowance. And fortunately, there's been some situation on different items like that before. So there is a strong emphasis for that.
Thank you, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, same question for South Carolina. How do you handle it?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what she said, we develop a preliminary estimate from the get-go to prepare for the STIP. And then the project managers will work with the designers to develop an estimate with quantities once it gets to that point. And then we'll have the PMs, we'll provide the PMs and engineers estimate a few months prior to letting.
Thank you, Mark. Todd?
We probably, must be probably 12, 15 years ago, we kind of went to a little bit of a different model where we used to program everything in the beginning through construction, and then we would manage it and realize our estimates were way off, and we would just have not a lot of control over the overall estimates. And when we developed more of an asset management model, so we have candidates out there for all different types of scopes, whether it's bridge replacements, bridge rehabilitations, or heavy treatments for paving, light treatments, whether it's reconstruction. All of those things have basically a developmental planning cost associated, whether it's per mile, per lane mile, square foot of bridge. That through our asset management group, we've developed these numbers for programming. And what we do is we every year develop a work plan, a 3-year work plan. So it moves ahead a year every year. And we typically don't, the only thing that we fund right from the get-go typically is straightforward paving projects that would have a construction value in it. So what we do is fund most of the other things we'll have an estimate in there, but we only fund the PE and right away. We don't fund any construction dollars to tie up any construction dollars. And as we go through the project development process every year, we get to a point that when we get to a preliminary design report, we're comfortable enough, because now that's based on an item basis, at least to put in construction value into the next work plan. And then that may be in the work plan, and say for this year, we put one in going for, we'll put it in for the 23, 24, 25 work plan. If it's beyond, if it's not going to be delivered next year, and it's say it targeted for 24, next year at this time, we will look at ones that have construction funding, and we will do a supplemental needs analysis based on more revised estimates. And the projects that have construction funding already kind of get that first slice of the pie. And then once that's taken care of, then that allows us to fund new construction projects. So that way but what it's allowed us to do is it's allowed us to, honestly, I think, have a little bit better sense of cost control. So we're not over committing construction dollars that we're not going to spend for years out.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to remind people, if you do have questions for the panel, please type them into the Q&A portion of the Zoom, and we'll go ahead and try to answer those questions. One of the questions we got was probably one on everybody's mind. How are you handling inflation? Are you only applying the increases to those items with high volatility, maybe those with oil, or are you applying them across the board on a % increase basis? So who would like to take first stab at that one?
I'll try. I'll give it a shot. We typically, up until recently, we've always used like a 1.5% or 2% if we're being more conservative as our inflation values. But it's not, you know, I remembered you using the word commiserate when we talked about an objective for getting together, like we'll commiserate with each other. But the 1.5% hasn't been accurate for us, especially over this past year. And one of the things that we're trying to do is we've got an SPR research project moving forward to help us with a construction index. And we're looking to use that construction index to look at historical information to help us track those costs a little bit better, that inflation a little bit better. So that's kind of our plan moving forward. But yeah, right now it's been tough with the supply issues and workforce issues.
Anyone else want to add in?
I'm sure. I can add in a little bit. So we most recently did some consistency across the state, and you know, have a 4% inflation rate, and that's based off of some, as Mark mentioned, about looking into that construction index. And so here at TxDOT, we have a highway construction index that we calculate on a monthly basis, looking at those bid items and being able to see. In the past, we've come to the conclusion that 4% was a pretty good way for, you know, that planning, you know, looking 2, 3 years, 4 years out. But right now with this volatility about what's going on, and you know, it's like the question asked, and you know, from Eric, it says here that, you know, are you just applying it to one item? And so the way we're kind of approaching it and looking at it is we've have the opportunity to use the PRBE tool. This is the probabilistic risk-based estimating tool that's out by FHWA. And in there, we are able to look at that base estimate that doesn't have contingency, you know, and look at it overall and apply a probabilistic view on the market conditions. And so that's what we're doing as the lettings for this next fiscal year, is to do a back behind the scenes approach of looking and evaluating that risk there. And tool's very great. I found that it, you know, really breaks down to your base variability, meaning, you know, what's the difference between if Mark, Todd, and I were to do an estimate, and then then you can account that impact to the market. And so you're able to evaluate it through there. And so I think that's very, very helpful. One thing that also is another approach that we have, when you go to that bid item level, when you're looking at that one price for here, like an example, oil, we use 3-point estimating too. We look at the most likely, the most optimistic, and the most pessimistic, and we do, you know, an expected value. And that helps with just kind of trying to see, because you've got those three points right there. So I just got low battery on here, so I'm gonna work on that right now, and thank.
I'll just say inside of Minnesota, we've got an economist who actually does an analysis, helps create our construction index, but he also gives us a projection across the 5-year program and then also across our 10-year program on what he believes that inflation rate's going to be. And what he tells us is he's never wrong. It's always a straight line. He's just not right on individual years because the line goes up and down, but the trend is always going up. So we use that on all of our projects and all of our items up until that final PS&E. And how we maybe manage some of the unusual inflation that's going on right now is while we use that general inflation amount, we would add in our risk register possible risks for some of the items that we're seeing a higher than average inflation rate, whether it be steel or oil or some of the things right now. And you'll capture that in the risk, like Monte Carlo analysis, that then kind of gets rolled up into the contingency. That's how we would do it for everything other than that final PS&E. The final PS&E, we'll really look at the individual items, and we'll kind of look at what we're getting for pricing right now and how we anticipate that pricing might change as this project moves into that final bid. Ted, did you want to add anything from Maine?
Yeah, I mean, we've struggled a little bit. And I know through AASHTO and other entities, like it looked like Maine was kind of ahead of this inflation thing because we had been putting out feelers for a long time and said we're seeing increases in construction. And a lot of people were like, no, we're not seeing them. Well, then everybody started seeing them. But Maine's a little bit like a cul-de-sac in New England, right? And you're not surrounded by Canada, so we don't have a lot of competition for contractors that come from out of state and other things like that. But what we tried to do we've done a couple of things in the last couple of years. Like the first year was kind of we foolishly, well, not foolishly, it was a good attempt. We thought we would try to control the market a little bit and keep our estimates a little bit lower and strategically think we're not going to pay a lot for that muffler and we're going to reject contracts, right? And try to force this is what we're talking, because the problem is the work plan I talked about, not a problem, but it's very transparent. So we put it out and it has the project values in it, not its total project value. So that caused I think some of the contractors thought that was construction cost, but it's the total project cost, all, right away P and C and everything. And so there's a ballpark there of where we think the project is, right? If they do some basic math, they can tell about what we're willing to pay for. So since then, we've kind of put a random number generator in there that it puts it in a range. So it's not kind of right exactly where we think the estimate is. But with then subsequent years, what we started to do is adjust those estimates by a certain percentage based on the nature of the work. After we developed the project, the ones that we would put in the work plan. The other that we didn't want to overreact to set like a new react to this is what the bids are coming in at. So this is the acceptable norm, and then 25% above on top of that will probably still award that mentality. So we tried to control a little bit that way. And what we did last year was kind of not a straight line percentage increase, but we looked at the nature of the project, and then we started to hear an awful lot about labor and things like that. And we said, okay, so if it's got night work, if it's got an awful lot of things that are labor intensive, then this percentage increase is going to be a little bit more for these, and the whole risk-based analysis thing, but kind of really thinking about the project specifically, and even down to, certain areas of the state where there may not be a lot of competition for contractors. So, we may only have 1 or 2 bidders. So taking that into account and things like that. So, and our paving industry is basically, we have 2 big companies that kind of split the state right down the middle. So they don't really cross each other very much. We have other smaller paving companies do smaller projects. So we take that into account in setting those up. So that's the best way we've done with inflation. I'm not sure how we're going to do it yet for this fall when we develop the work plan. It'll be a 4th iteration probably.
Thank you. I appreciate all your input. I'll also do something else. If anyone else from a DOT is handling inflation in a very unique way and wants to share that, type that in the Q&A, and we'll try to relay that on to everyone else as well. The next question, kind of shifting away from inflation for the moment, was that question was, I noticed that our DOT does not have accurate estimates for mobilization and maintenance of traffic. These costs are not realistic with how contractors actually bid. Does anyone have any thoughts on that and how to estimate that better?
We usually look at projects that are similar to the one that we're estimating for. We try to find projects that, for traffic control that had lane closures or whatever would be similar to that project. And we try to estimate it that way. We use that historical data, even though it's a lump sum item, but we try to make it for similar projects in some similar regions of the state. And if the percentage does end up looking like it could be an unbalanced bid, we call it an unbalanced bid, and we won't award it to that contractor.
I agree right there with Mark. It's just looking at that for right now. That's something to evaluate and to consider in that mobilization as it comes in, and it's looking at the historical data is what we've always done in the past, and as well as bouncing off of Todd, how he's mentioned about evaluating that project, its location, where it is, and then evaluating and seeing that is it appropriate for what they're bidding on and what they have.
And it's an appropriate question. It's good to see somebody else is experiencing this, because every week we do our bid openings on Wednesday, and on Friday we do a bid review meeting to decide whether we're going to award or reject those bids. Every week, the overages are in mobilization, maintenance of traffic, erosion control, and cofferdams. It's unbelievable. So, and what it is because that money's up front to the contractor for a lot of those things. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. And mobilization sometimes for certain projects is more than others. And certainly you would expect that in certain areas of the state. We get that with everything going on, but it's basically those 4 areas where we have our major overages is in those places. And we haven't found a better way to control it is the issue, right?
Just curious, does Maine have a payout curve for mobilization or some of those other lump sum items?
Nah, it basically kicks in so.
And we do use that from time to time. So mobilization is paid out, a certain amount upon award, another amount when they start, and then so on and so forth. I think it's kind of helped curb some of that getting paid up front. Still not it's probably a way of being able to better estimate some of the mobilization, for example, but it's still not a perfect way.
Right.
I was just going to ask that, Chris. Is there anybody else? I was just going to jump off of this question here about mobilization. Has anybody utilized payout curves? And that's great. That's a great insight to be able to, because you just look at that, like it comes in and you'll see 10%. And then if some of our projects here in Texas, it's like, hundreds of millions of dollars, and 10% of that is just, it's quite staggering. So that'd be really great to learn more about.
I think we're going to jump down a couple of questions here and ask a question was, other than design build project, have you found a way to obtain input from contractors to improve the accuracy of estimating? For example, in the early stages of design, getting information from a contractor regarding their approach on how they would construct a bridge in a busy urban environment.
Yeah, we've actually implemented we called it our CID approach, which is contractor input design. And it's basically just what we do is we pre-qualify contractors and invite them to put in just a proposal to whether with this, and we don't do it for all projects, but certain projects that may have constructability issues and things like that may not necessarily rise to the level of a CMGC, but still, to be able to evaluate, whether a temporary bridge or replace in kind or things like that maybe. And so we invite them early on in the process and qualify a group of them, maybe 4 or 5. They're the only ones that can bid on the project when we put the bid out. And so all the meetings, there'll be an initial meeting with all the contractors, and then we have individual meetings with them to go with us through the design process and just give us input, right? And so we will take, they say, if you consider doing this, this would make a huge difference if you consider doing this. Now we take some of that stuff with a grain of salt because, we know it's kind of geared towards certain, if one bridge contractor has a multitude of huge cranes and they think it would be easier to versus others and stuff. But so we take all those comments and kind of craft a project out of that. And then we put it out to bid to just those contractors. And we've seen some really good results with that, as far as, and like I said, it's not for everything, but things that have certain constructability issues, access, maintenance, traffic issues. For us in Maine, we have an awful lot of fishery and permitting issues and limitations on work windows. So anything that we can do to stay out of the wet, to provide more time for the contractor to do the work are good. So certain approaches to how we do stuff.
And very similarly in Minnesota, we do constructability reviews on certain projects so that, the complicated ones, we get that contractor perspective. They are not under contract at that time. So we're just calling in the companies that would be likely bidders just to confidentially talk with us about different strategies and how that might influence price. And then the other thing that we learned is if your state has the ability to do CMGC, those projects, we have learned a lot about how contractors think. And we not only are able to do that in the CMGC world, but we are able to take those learnings and apply it to design, bid, build as well.
We haven't incorporated contractor input, prior to letting on any of our projects, but we have done some constructability reviews. In fact, for some of our interstate resurfacing work that goes over the threshold for a VE study that requires a VE study, our division offices kind of let us do a VE study, but it's really kind of a constructability review. And we've had a lot of success just having construction folks, inspectors provide input and give good guidance to make those projects better. But we have not incorporated, there have been situations where we may have a project and we put it out for bid and we don't get any bids. And if that happens, we may reach out to the contracting community to see, why didn't you guys bid on it? You don't like us or what? And just kind of get a feel for what we may be missing.
Jumping down a little bit, there was a question. Well, actually, we did receive a comment that a couple of other states, Michigan, is also using a payout curve for their mobilization. And then there was a question down here. Do your states have an independent group that reviews estimates that are being turned in for letting? So just curious, the 3 states on the panel, do you have that independent group that does that review of the estimate before it's let?
We're in the midst of implementing a process for our larger mobility projects and the larger ones that have some more restrictions on the funding that it is. And so we've approached that. And so we are doing a bit of looking over those estimates to see and anticipate what that letting may be. So we have scheduled out a way of looking at those projects and estimates. But those, we are not getting down to the actual bid. We are making that assumption that they have done, the bid analysis and looking at that and then evaluating where their risk is. By evaluating that risk, then we would then look into it a little bit further into its bid and to see what they've chosen for those items if something is off. So, but we're implementing something because of these situations, it is to light to like, where are we? We don't want to have a stale estimate going to letting either, as well as to, ask the questions, and to see, what were the assumptions that were made and what risks were taken into account, and as well as when was the last updated. So we have that kind of implementation right now. But we do also have an estimator in one district who is doing, and we have a title for that as well, to internally within a group too.
Thank you.
And I was just going to say, in our state, the project manager develops the preliminary estimate, and then once it gets a little bit further along and they have quantities, they'll further develop that estimate. But before letting, we have an office in letting preparation that prepares the engineer's estimate. So it is separate from the contractor in that way. And that in the office, the letting preparation office, they look at things like fuel indexes and, just with the climate of the way the bids are coming in right now due to, all the supply issues and everything, we're using that standard deviation, and we're probably cheating a little bit more to that 80% on that standard deviation because of the way the contracting community is dealing and handling the bids right now. So, we're still, we're following our FHWA guidance as far as how we approach our engineers' estimates, but we also feel like we're in a defendable position by using that 80% cost.
Thank you. Next question that we have, and I'll remind people again, you can insert your question into the Q&A portion of Zoom, and we'll see what we can do about answering them. Next question is, how do you handle utility cost estimate with the local or utility owner? And please share if any lessons learned experience in providing your utility cost estimate. I chuckle because I'll tell you, man, utilities are one of the toughest things on a construction project, getting them relocated, but also trying to do that estimate. So anyone got any good insight on how to handle that?
All right. Well, here's a question for we don't pay for utility relocation within the right of way in the state of Maine. So we're fortunate that way. We accommodate them where we will, as part of our project, their work can be done but it's their estimate and it's a non-participating item in the contract. So we're very fortunate to have that.
Is that true for public utilities as well? If you're doing the mill and overlay and the street utilities,
If
water
it's
main or whatever?
Yeah, if it's in our right of way, it's not. The only time we have to pay to move utilities is if we're moving them out of their own rights. So we know we have that pretty good. So now the struggle now it's good. What we do struggle with in this environment though is when we have a project now, they want to go in as part of our project, bids come in high, whether they want to agree to awarding the contract or not. And it gets delicate sometimes because of the moratorium that, okay, if you don't want to do your water and sewer, we're still going ahead with our project and you're going to have to wait 5 years until you can do any of those improvements. So.
Any other thoughts about utilities?
We on our estimates, when we are accepting bids, we have one pay item for the utilities, but then we require the low bid to send in, all the items and the unit cost for those items. And so that gives us like a little bit of a history with the magnitude. In our utilities office, they actually focus on helping us develop those estimates based on some of that data that we get from contractors over time.
Okay, another question gave us a great answer to this one. It says Missouri DOT has dedicated utility engineers across the district that specialize in providing those estimates and coordinating relocation. So if anyone else gets stuck, maybe calling Missouri might be able to give us a little help in hand.
Yes, we have some people who help with the utility coordination, as well as the utility cost there. But we are also structured to where, you know, unless it's reimbursable, then they are included in the, you know, we have joint bid or in the contract, but most typically they're responsible depending on the contract.
Next question to the panel members. How often do you get cost estimates during project development? Do you use market-based cost estimates or historical bid and letting-based cost estimates? So maybe starting with the scoping and early preliminary design, how do you guys do those estimates, and about how frequently are they updated?
So we approach those preliminary estimates with maybe a per mile cost basis, or we may use just historical similar projects and just try to develop a per mile cost. And that's how we kind of get those first initial numbers out there. And we're conservative on those numbers. And
do you update those annually?
No.
Okay. All right.
We probably don't have we put them in the STIP, and because of the climate right now with estimates, it would be a good idea to revisit those, but it typically isn't that big it's not that huge of a problem. But once we get that those quantities to start coming in, then we like start to zero in on updating the STIP and things like that.
But Maine or Texas, how often do you do your updates, and what kind of basis do you have for a cost estimate?
So, so we do a mix of the three that were asked here, you know, looking at the market, looking and seeing what's happening. We have historic bid data. We're fortunate enough that our historic bid data is in 3 months and 12 months. It's also broken down by region of state, by district. So you can look at a 3 months average for your district area and the county, and you can even look and see, you know, what's happening in the counties nearby as well. And then, looking at the most recent letting based estimate too, what was recent with the same type project class, you know, type of project. So all three are taken into account through there, and you know, they're updated. Our guidance is to update at minimum, you know, every 6 months to a year, not letting it go stale. But most importantly, it should be really not just so structured to not miss something that could have happened. So if there's a significant change in the project that results into some type of either risk or an increase in scope, and any of those changes, we strongly recommend for that reevaluation of the cost estimate. But they are put in, and we make those recommendations for a full 10-year plan. And then it goes in through the planning process, because we want to be as most proactive as possible as those projects go through, and not see such an increase of something that was stale from 5 years ago in the planning document, and then end up having like a 70% increase at letting, you know, so.
I think Nicole touched on kind of a better practice. I've seen some of our project managers do that estimate, and then as the project's being developed, maybe risks are realized and they note how much increase in cost that's going to be. Or maybe there's an opportunity that's realized, and then they kind of just keep a running total of the pluses and minuses. And when you get that running total, it's kind of a long list. It's time to redo the estimate. But if you keep that running total, you have a pretty good idea where your cost estimate is at almost any point in time.
Yeah. We have through the project development process, we probably have 4 or 5 milestones that we definitely need an updated estimate on. And usually the first one's just planning level, like I talked about, whether it's per lane mile, whether it's per square foot of bridge or whatever. And then once we get to the PDR level, it's more item based. And then from that point, our project managers also have an expectation that on the 15th of every month, both schedules and budgets are, to the best available knowledge, accurate. So in the event, like Nicole talked about, you know, if there's a scope change up or down, right, an increase or reduction, then they should take another crack at the estimate. And in fact, on our Oracle dashboard page, which we look at all of our data, there's a million pages that we look at. One of them is both the schedule one and a estimate data integrity page, and you can look at it and see the last time it was updated. And we have a monthly production meeting that we go over those, and we will let whether it's highway program, bridge program, multimodal program managers know, hey, by the way, some of these look stale. We need to look at them and make sure that they've been updated, because as we start to pull that information together for future needs for the next work plan, it's important that those are they're at least not old. They may not be 100% accurate because we don't have better information, but if we know, it hasn't been touched for 2 years, that probably it should be at least updated to something that's more realistic.
Thank you. Next question is, are you seeing a lot more single bidder responses? And I'm going to add a little bit to that. Are you also seeing an increase in no bidders on your projects? So maybe starting with Mark up in South Carolina.
Not really. I think we're probably getting a large number of 4 or 5 bidders for our projects right now, and that kind of helps us as estimators, because even if our engineer's estimate isn't where we want it to be is in relation to those bids, you're getting a competitive bid, and so we do feel good about moving forward with that. Typically, if we're getting single or no bidders, it's in an area of the state where it's just difficult for contractors to get to.
How about Nicole? Texas seeing any problems with single bidders or
Well,
no bidders?
I wouldn't say, haven't heard of just as a single bidder, but I've seen I've heard about come in the springtime, a little late spring, beginning of summer. We did have in our community practice, there was a conversation about the reduction in bidders that are occurring, and seeing that some of the smaller contractors were pairing up with more larger construction companies into being able to deliver these and be able to be a part to bid. And one of the discussions we had was overall is doing the overhead of doing business with the DOT has does make an impact on these smaller contractors, and that there is this tendency that we've seen where they are now, like I said, pairing up with the larger contractors, and to be able to stay apart and be active as well. And so that was a conversation that we had, but we have had that happening, and it is noticeable, and we did see it through the summer as well.
Maine, I think you mentioned you already had a project or two without a bidder.
Yeah, we and tell me if anybody can figure out these trends, please let me know, because we can't figure it out. So a couple weeks ago, we had 2 twin interstate bridges, 9 bidders. Okay, excellent, 9 bidders, and what we're finding is in that 5 or 6 bidder range, we're pretty close to the engineer's estimate. And then as we get lower and lower, we obviously like 1 bidders were like 50% over and stuff. So the very following week, we had a downtown reconstruction project in Searsports on the coast of Maine, nice little coastal village town. Good project that's been in the work plan for a couple of years, a lot of interest in it, no bidders. And then this week we had a bridge in a pretty rural part of the state with 5 bidders. So we're at a loss. We don't know. We don't know what's an attractive project. We don't. And what we're finding is contractors, there's so much work out there, I think, between us and other entities, that they are picking and choosing. They are, it's like, this is a project that works well for me. I don't have to mobilize much. I don't have to pay my people to stay overnight. I don't have to. So I will go at this aggressively. Others, I'll throw a bid in, maybe, but it's going to cost you. So we have seen an uptick. That's the first time we've had like a major reconstruction highway project with no bidders. We've had no bidders on like some large culvert replacements and things like that before, which hasn't been shocking. But that one really kind of threw us for a loop, because for a long time we knew contractors had circled it on the calendar as an important project, but they just didn't go after it.
And similarly to Texas and Minnesota, what we kind of saw was in late 2020, most of 2021, we saw an uptick in the number of bidders. last portion of 21 and now into 22, we're seeing that decrease in number of bidders. And we have had a handful of projects with a single bidder, one without any bidders. So we're seeing the same thing. Moving on to our next question. How far out are you estimating your program? For instance, Call for Projects in Michigan does 5 years ahead for planning on reconstruction rehab. Is that serving your planning needs? And I'll start a little bit with in Minnesota. We do our first estimate when the project goes into our 10-year plan. Not every project goes into our 10-year plan. It may not go out 10 years out. It's somewhere between 5 and 10 years is when those projects kind of start to pop in. And when they populate in that plan, we do that estimate. And then likewise, the smaller the project might even show up in the STIP out of a set aside or something like that. And that's when we do that estimate. It is serving our planning needs, but there probably are better ways of doing it as well. So I'd love to hear what the other states are doing. Go ahead.
So we have a 10-year plan. It's called our Unified Transportation Program. And those are all projects that are part of it. But specifically for the construction rehab, we call it preventive maintenance plan. And that's only 4 years out. That's where we actually put some, it's looking at those allocations for that 4-year plan for that. From when my experience in one of our districts here in the Austin district, we felt like it was working very well. It is evaluated every year. We work with the maintenance group and they go through and show the needs, and they work with the offices to find, prioritization, what's important and what needs to be taken care of. And so it's evaluated every year, and it worked quite smoothly. So it did help. As far as for the cost estimating for that, they were developed very parametrically for that 4 years, looking at a seal code or, or a mill seal overlay and stuff. And so as they came in closer in, those were being developed more in a 6-month time frame. And so those were, looked at and evaluated. So that layout seemed to be working at that time. It's been some time since I've been able to be intimately involved with that. But it worked very smoothly. And but that was for like I've mentioned, for the reconstruction rehab projects and stuff for the preventive maintenance plan. But even larger projects or so, they're in that 10-year plan window that we look at. And our guidance is to evaluate, look at today, what your project would be, and really account for all the pieces of it and allowances and risk-based contingency as well.
South Carolina is similar. We have a 10-year plan that focuses on resurfacing interstates, bridges replaced, and we have a rural road safety program.
Yeah, we still have kind of a long range plan, but we also have we have two different reports that got developed. One was keeping our bridges safe, and one was our roads report, which basically, like I said, from an asset management standpoint, kind of laid out groundwork of how much we should do every year of those type of things given available funding. And so that came up with planning level estimates for that type of work. But as the committees meet every year, putting forward candidates, then once they go into our work plan, they become more real. And then those estimates are really then fine-tuned to more of a deliverable. So because once they get on our work plan, they will be delivered, unless something drastic happens that we go through a work plan management process to actually withdraw them. But that becomes our commitment book of, we've got this is our long range plan, but these, once they get in the work plan, and like I said, it's for 3 years and it's done every year. That tells the public that this is the work that is actually coming. We're actually doing it. Because when we used to have our 2-year biennial transportation improvement programs, we had 1 million projects in there. And when I was a project designer, I had projects that never had an intention of being built. They were some promise to a politician, they were whatever, but we have really gone to the point of from an asset management standpoint, and this is our strategy, that once it gets in our work plan, it will be delivered.
I think we got time for one more question here. And the last question I'm going to ask you, our panel, is how do your organizations measure success for accuracy of estimates when compared with the received low bid? I ask this because this is the measure that we're all held to, and I'm curious to see what other states are doing.
Right. I mean, we try to have 50% of our projects within 10% of that low bid. That's you know, that's kind of what we fall back on, and that's a bar that we've been meeting until lately.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the same as well as what Mark mentioned. Yes, we're held, to that 10% to be able to see how well they are to that. The engineer's estimates to the low bid. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where we were. Like I said, what we did was implement this bid review meeting to really look at it, and again, what that assesses is this a project we absolutely have to do, or can we wait? And some we absolutely have to do. So if the estimate may have come in at 30% over, we may make a decision to award that project. And then what we do is we look at, okay, what did we miss? Did we underestimate given this, or did we really have reasonable pavement prices on this project? So we kind of go through that, but until the market stabilizes and everything else, I think it's going to be awful hard for us to come up with metrics that we're comfortable with because you don't want the overreaction of people creating crazy estimates and padding their estimates. So you don't want to create that culture. So it's okay, if you went through a methodical approach and everybody agrees with the assumptions that were made and the bids came in high, they came in high. So how do we address it for next time? But
Yeah.
In Minnesota, we have a very similar process for our engineers' estimates, that PS&E estimate. But we've also established a budget for every project as they become in the STIP. And that budget is based on the risk-based cost estimate that then is inflated out over until letting. And we have a target of 70% of our projects being within plus or minus 15% of that budget when it's actually let. So not only do we have the measurement on the PS&E, but we also have it on that project development estimate as well. Mark, I think you had something else to add too.
Oh, I was just going to piggyback on what Todd said. There have been situations where, the bids did come in high and we just decided to put a project on the shelf for a little while. And we're saving it for a time when we hope that the market stabilizes. And then there have been projects where the bids have come in high, but it was a high priority project. And, we may have tried to push it through. And then there's situations where we relet the project and then daggum, the price, the bids come in higher than they did the first time. So it's a weird time. It's definitely a weird time.
Yeah. And I like to add from what Chris mentioned about, the metrics, as well as one of the metrics was after the letting is looking at the, we have a design on time, design on budget, metric of looking at that time period of the baseline of from when it was at letting, and then as well as what, that project ended up costing, considering change orders, because, you don't want to, it could be that maybe it was within the 10% of the letting, but did it really, what did it end up being at the full end of that construction as well,
right,
to consider. So yeah, but it's a lot to consider, if Mark, if y'all are putting projects on the shelves trying to wait and then they go back out, and then it's like, this is just a crazy time right now. Yeah, trying to balance it.
Thank you very much for the responses. Nicole, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. I think you had a way of estimators might be able to get involved if they wanted a little bit more information. I think the T as well as the.
Yes. That's all right. Well, thank you. So yeah, so I'd like to invite and share that the Transportation Estimators Association is having a conference. It is in person. It will be in State Line, Nevada, and October 11th through the 13th. And you can check out our website. There's a whole lot of information there with save the date. And also we also have a community of practice that meets quarterly. And so, welcome, and anybody who's interested, feel free to email myself or email the T board, and we can get you connected with our quarterly conversations of the community of practice as well too. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to give a special thanks to our panelists for taking time out of their day today, joining us, and for their information that they shared with us. It was very, very well appreciated. I also want to thank all of our attendees today. Again, hopefully you learned or picked up a couple of nuggets, or at least nothing else, no longer feel alone in how you do it, because there's other states out there probably struggling with many of the same issues, same questions that you have. Our next technical committee on project management will also be hosting a webinar in about 3 months' time. We're trying to do them quarterly, and we'll be introducing a new topic with each one of those. So thank you very much for joining us. And with that, my measure as a mediator is, did I end on time? And I'm going to end a little bit early to make sure that my measure was good. And thank you very much. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.